And we're allowed to put them on the no-fly list when it comes to airlines. But because of the National Rifle Association, I cannot prohibit those people from buying a gun. This is somebody who is a known ISIL sympathizer, and if he wants to walk in to a gun store or a gun show right now and buy as many weapons as ammo as he can, nothing's prohibiting him from doing that, even though the FBI knows who that person is. So
there is a familiar argument in American politics. Democrats want your guns. That argument has been repeated for years by Republicans, the NRA, conservative media, and politicians who want voters to believe that even basic gun safety measures are somehow the beginning of government tyranny. But back in 2016, Barack Obama was asked exactly that question. The argument was simple. Why restrict responsible gun owners instead of just going after criminals? And then came the favorite Republican talking point, Chicago. Obama's response is interesting because he doesn't argue that guns should be taken away from responsible owners. He argues something much more basic. If America can use research, regulation, and public health policy to make cars safer, why can't we do the same thing with guns? And then he gets to an even bigger problem. Why could someone considered dangerous enough to be kept off an airplane still potentially buy a firearm? And remember, this is a conversation from 2016. We're looking back at what was actually being argued at the time, not pretending this happened yesterday. So let's hear the exchange for ourselves. I'm Neil. This is The Honest Perspective. Facts matter more than political talking points. Let's get into it.
So good guys, why then do you and Hillary want to control and restrict and limit gun manufacturers, gun owners, and the responsible use of guns and ammunition to the rest of us, the good guys, instead of holding the bad guys accountable for their actions? And Mr. President, if I may, I'd like to use Chicago, your hometown, a city that has some of the strictest gun laws in the nation, a city that for decades and still is under Democratic control, a city that has an outrageous and even embarrassing murder rate as my first example. Why can't we round up these thugs, these drug dealers and gang members, and hold them accountable for their actions, or allow the good people in Chicago access to firearms to protect themselves?
Good. All right. Well, let me, it's a multi-part question, so let me just say a couple things. First of all, the notion that I or Hillary or Democrats or whoever you want to choose are hell-bent on taking away folks' guns is just not true. And I don't care how many times the NRA says it. I'm about to leave office. There have been more guns sold since I've been president than just about any time in U.S. history. There are enough guns for every man, woman, and child in this country. And at no point have I ever proposed confiscating guns from responsible gun owners. So it's just not true.
Notice what just happened. The question was framed as if there are only two choices. Either you protect gun owners or you regulate guns. But that is a false choice. We already accept regulation around things that people have a constitutional or personal interest in using. Cars are regulated. Pharmaceutical companies are regulated. Food manufacturers are regulated. Alcohol is regulated. Nobody argues that because the government regulates cars, the government is trying to confiscate everybody's cars. And Obama's point is that guns should not somehow become the one category where evidence and regulation are treated as an attack on freedom itself. But he doesn't stop there. He takes the argument into something much harder to dismiss. What happens when we actually study why people are dying? Let's continue.
What I have said is precisely what you suggested, which is why don't we treat this like every other thing that we use? We used to have really bad auto fatality rates. The auto fatality rate has actually dropped precipitously, drastically since I was a kid. Why is that? We decided we had seatbelt laws. We decided to have manufacturers put airbags in place. We decided to crack down on drunk driving and texting. We decided to redesign roads so that they were less likely to have a car bank. We studied what is causing these fatalities using science and data and evidence, and then we slowly treated it like the public health problem it was, and it got reduced. We are not allowed to do any of that when it comes to guns because people, if you propose anything, it is suggested that we're trying to wipe away gun rights and impose tyranny and martial law. Do you know that Congress will not allow the Center for Disease Control to study gun violence? They're not allowed to study it because the notion is that by studying it the same way we do with traffic accidents, somehow that's going to lead to everybody's guns being confiscated. When we talked about background checks, if you buy a car, if you want to get a license, first of all, you got to get a license. You have to take a test. People have to know that you know how to drive. You don't have to do any of that with respect to buying a gun. And when we talked about doing effective background checks, it was resisted because the notion was we were going to take your guns away.
And this is where the debate gets bigger than the Second Amendment. Because if you actually want fewer people to die, you need to be willing to ask uncomfortable questions. Which policies work? Which ones don't? What does the data tell us? And what happens when political pressure makes certain research politically radioactive? That is not an anti-gun argument. It is an argument against treating evidence itself as the enemy. But Obama's strongest point is still coming. Because now he moves from research and background checks to a very specific security question. And this one is difficult to explain away as simply a disagreement over philosophy.
I just came from a meeting today in the Situation Room in which I've got people who we know have been on ISIL websites, living here in the United States, U.S. citizens, and we're allowed to put them on the no-fly list when it comes to airlines. But because of the National Rifle Association, I cannot prohibit those people from buying a gun. This is somebody who is a known ISIL sympathizer, and if he wants to walk in to a gun store or a gun show right now and buy as many weapons as ammo as he can, nothing's prohibiting him from doing that, even though the FBI knows who that person is. So, sir, I just have to say respectfully that there is a way for us to have common sense gun laws. There is a way for us to make sure that lawful, responsible gun owners like yourself are able to use it for sporting, hunting, protecting yourself. But the only way we're going to do that is if we don't have a situation in which anything that is proposed is viewed as some tyrannical destruction of the Second Amendment. And that's how the issue too often gets framed.
What makes this exchange worth revisiting today is that the argument Obama was making in 2016 was never really about taking guns away from ordinary Americans. It was about whether America should treat gun violence as a problem that can be studied and reduced. And that distinction matters. Because the "they're coming for your guns" argument has been incredibly effective politically. It takes almost every discussion about background checks, firearm access, gun trafficking, safe storage, or research, and turns it into a question about whether the Second Amendment itself is under attack. But those are not the same thing. You can believe in the constitutional right to own a firearm and still believe that the government has a responsibility to prevent dangerous people from obtaining one. In fact, that should be the starting point of any serious conversation. And there is something else important about Obama's 2016 argument. The auto safety comparison wasn't just rhetoric. America did dramatically reduce motor vehicle death rates over the long term through a combination of safer vehicle design, seat belts, drunk driving enforcement, road engineering, and other interventions. Nobody accomplished that by saying, just punish the irresponsible drivers. They changed the system. They studied the problem. They looked for ways to make the system less deadly. That is the basic idea Obama was trying to apply to guns. And yes, we should correct him where necessary. His statement about the CDC was too sweeping. The federal government was not literally prohibited from conducting every form of gun violence research. The Dickey Amendment prohibited federal funds from being used to advocate or promote gun control, and the political environment around that provision severely constrained firearm research. Even the amendment's original Republican sponsor, Jay Dickey, later said he regretted the chilling effect it had created. That correction doesn't destroy Obama's argument. It actually makes the argument stronger because the underlying issue was real. And then there is the terrorism loophole. Obama was arguing that someone considered sufficiently dangerous to be kept off an airplane could still potentially purchase a firearm. His administration explicitly pushed Congress to close that gap in 2016. Now, there were legitimate civil liberties concerns about using secret government watch lists to restrict a constitutional right. That criticism deserved an answer. But notice what the reasonable answer is. It isn't do nothing. It is create a system with evidence, due process, judicial oversight, and an appeals process that can stop genuinely dangerous people from obtaining weapons. That's what serious policymaking looks like. The problem with American gun politics is that one side keeps trying to convince people that even discussing regulation is an attack on freedom. But freedom doesn't mean living in a society where every preventable death has to be accepted as the price of doing nothing. And this is where I think the old good guys versus bad guys framing falls apart. Because the good guys are not magically protected by having more guns everywhere. A society can have responsible gun owners and still have irresponsible gun dealers. It can have legal gun owners and illegal gun trafficking. It can have people who use firearms for hunting and self-defense and still have mass shootings. Those realities can exist at the same time. So the question should never have been, are you for guns or against guns? That's too easy. The real question is, what actually saves lives while respecting people's rights? And if a policy works, use it. If it doesn't work, change it. If the evidence is unclear, study it. That's not tyranny. That's governing. And the fact that we're still having essentially the same argument years later tells you something about American politics. Sometimes the political incentive is stronger than the incentive to actually solve the problem. If you believe we should have political debates based on evidence instead of fear, fearmongering, and corporate lobbying, subscribe to The Honest Perspective. Truth over talking points. People over political power. I'm Neil. We don't protect democracy by refusing to question the powerful. That's The Honest Perspective. And that's where I'll leave you.